So what I want to do right now is do a think aloud of a first-time reading of the article that you have, Island Civilization. And I do go through these processes as I'm reading something, especially this large. It's not an easy task, and if you try and go from the first word to the last word and understand it all in one reading, it's next to impossible. So I'm going to show you how I go through an article like this, just starting it out for you, and then you can pick it up on your own when I finish. So we've already gone through the previewing of this with the title, Island Civilization, A Vision for Human Occupancy of Earth in the Fourth Millennium. You've looked at the author, Roderick Nash, and so we know the context in which this was written. We do have some quotes here, and the quotes kind of set the theme whenever an author uses the quotes. So looking at those, What We Call Wilderness is a Civilization Other Than Our Own by Henry David Thoreau. I know some about him. He lived in the wilderness and wrote quite a bit about it. Darwin's Dice Have Rolled Badly for Earth by Edward O. Wilson. I'm not sure who he is, but it's kind of cute the way you said it. Not sure I agree with it, though. The beauty of island civilization is that it permits humans to fulfill their evolutionary potential without compromising or eliminating the opportunity of other species doing the same. Roderick Nash. I'm looking here, and since this is also the speaker of this lecture, I'm beginning to think that maybe this has a lot to do with his thesis. So this presentation is offered in op-ed style. The underlying research appears in two of my books, Wilderness and the American Mind, and The Rights of Nature, A History of Environmental Ethics. Our biography research has helped us understand what this is all about. So here we go. I'm going to get started in the reading, and I'll be stopping occasionally, and this is how I basically do a think aloud. The new third millennium we are just entering affords an excellent opportunity to think big about the history and future of wilderness and civilization on planet Earth. Of course, a millennium is an entirely synthetic as opposed to astronomical concept. There's one of our vocabulary words. I want to highlight that. Measuring time in 1,000-year units only began in 1852. That's interesting. I didn't realize that. When Christian officials arbitrarily fixed a date for the birth of Christ. So there was nothing special about December 31st, 999. That's funny. There wouldn't have even been that measurement. It wasn't even recognized as the end of the first millennium. But we made a big deal about the end of the second 1,000 years later on December 31st, 1999. Boy, I remember that one. Everybody was in a panic because they thought Y2K was going to cause all these computers to go haywire and we'd have to be totally dependent on each other and not on computers. It's actually kind of a fun time to be around. Here was an opportunity to transcend our species' characteristic myopia. Okay, here's another of the vocabulary words. I'm going to highlight that. Rarely do humans make plans more than a couple of years in advance, and we don't do history very well either. It's a safe bet that you can't name 2 of your 8 great-grandparents, right? Similarly, we don't often think in the wider angles that encompass our species as a whole. This is at the end of the first paragraph. I don't entirely think it's the thesis, but it is leading up to it. If it were the thesis, there'd be a little bit more of the title in it. So my mission here, ooh, this is good. I love those kind of phrases because they tell me exactly what this is about. So my mission here is to review the history of human-nature relations and to extend our concern to the big picture. That's probably what this paragraph is going to talk about. What could the human tenure on Earth be like 1,000 years from now, at the start of the 4th millennium? My proposal involves some really major changes and will be controversial. Remember I told you about this one? At first glance, you may think island civilization is crazy and impossible, but not so fast, my friends. Don't stop with criticism. The whole purpose of this essay, ooh, I like those phrases too. The whole purpose of this essay is to put forward for discussion a strategy for occupation of this planet that will work in the very long run and for all the natural world. Whoops. I'll go ahead and highlight that too. This is simply the greatest challenge facing our species, and in a sense, facing evolution on Earth. If you disagree with some or all of my vision, create your own, particularly if you think staying the present course is the way to go. Put forward your evidence and reasoning. The essential thing is that we occasionally lift our eyes from everyday details and 5-year plans to the far horizons of planetary possibility. I've just kind of lost the thought here. I'm going to have to go back and look at this because I'm not quite sure what I just read. If you think staying the present course is the way to go, put forward your evidence and reasoning. So he's wanting me to enter into a conversation with him. The essential thing is that we occasionally lift our eyes from everyday details and 5-year plans to the far horizons of planetary possibility. So it's thinking ahead. Having such a goal is a vital step to solving problems. Without it, we lack direction, and a means to evaluate options as they come into focus. Okay, I understand this a little bit better now. But this is really a negative characterization of humanity. Nash is asking us to move beyond our typical short-sightedness and consider what things could be like on Earth in 1,000 years. The opening paragraph really helps drive the point home that this topic really matters to us, and more importantly for future generations and the other species we share with this planet. I like the idea that Nash sets up the idea of millennium in the first paragraph. It puts into perspective our fascination with time, this whole business of starting at this millennium here between December 31st, 999 to December 1st, 1999 is really vast difference. Okay, let me pick up here at paragraph 3. As a starting point, let's consider wilderness. It's a state of mind, a perception, rather than a geographical reality. And prior to the advent of herding and agriculture about, 10,000 years before the present, it didn't exist. But after we begin to draw mental lines between ourselves and nature, and to place walls and fences on the land, the idea of controlled versus uncontrolled environments acquired meaning. Uncontrolled versus controlled environments. This really seems to be where he's going to be talking, is that difference between these two entities. The root of the word wilderness in Old English was something that had its own will. The adjective that came to be used was wild. For example, wildfire, wild or undammed rivers, wild cats. You can't herd them. The other important part of the word ness indicates a condition or place. So wilderness literally means self-willed land, a place where wild, undomesticated animals roam and where natural processes proceed unencumbered by human interference. This definition seems to be really important because he's taken his time to actually discuss what it is, so I'm going to highlight that as well. After humans created farms and literally bet our survival on them instead of on hunting and gathering, uncontrolled nature became the enemy of the new civilization. Pastoral societies, like those that produced the Old and New Testaments, became obsessed with making the crooked straight and the rough places plain. This is another one of those definitions that seems to be important to the text, so I'm going to highlight that. Oops. It's a lot easier when you do this on an actual piece of paper. For thousands of years, the success of civilization seemed to mandate the destruction of wild places, wild animals, and wild peoples. In the Bible, wilderness was the land God cursed. Its antipode was called paradise. Here's another one of those juxtapositions that seems to really be important. Adam and Eve lost it when they angered God and found themselves banished in the wild. The first European colonists of the New World carried in their intellectual baggage a full load of bias against wilderness. The last thing settlers of the eastern seaboard had in mind was protecting wild nature or establishing national parks. And since this is an exclamation, I want to highlight that as well. Indians were savages who needed to be civilized or eliminated. After a rocky start, these pioneers became very good at breaking the will of uncontrolled lands and peoples. Axes, rifles, and barbed wire, and more recently railroads, dams, and freeways, were the celebrated tools of an environmental transformation that left the wilderness in scattered remains. There's a lot of rhetoric in this too, so I know that this is important to him with scattered remains and environmental transformation. Okay. Lost in the celebration of Western expansion, however, was the possible irony in the process. When does success in too great a dose produce failure? This is a rhetorical question that he's posing, so I'm going to highlight that because that's going to be really reflective of his main idea. We always thought of growth as synonymous with progress, but maybe bigger is not better if it creates a civilization that is unsustainable. Maybe what really needs to be conquered is not the wilderness, but our technological, capitalist-driven culture in its cancer-like tendency to self-destruct. Wow, that is a really powerful rhetorical statement. Look at all those adjectives in there, and cancer-like, capitalist-driven, self-destruct. It is interesting that he begins this discussion of planetary solutions in 1,000 years by going back in time and starting with a discussion of wilderness. I guess as an historian, he would naturally want to explain the history of wilderness as a way of showing us that our views of wilderness have evolved for the better over time. Maybe by opening with this discussion, he is setting the stage for us to realize that our views on other important issues can also change for the better over time. I had never considered a time when wilderness did not exist, but I see his point. Man was not always removed from nature. For most of human history, we have lived with and within nature rather than being separated from it, as most of us are now. I also noticed these examples of the oppositional language that I pointed out to you earlier. Controlled versus uncontrolled, wild versus pastoral societies versus wilderness. I also, his paragraphs so far have been fairly long. In the paragraph that begins, lost in the celebration, this one here, he uses a shorter paragraph. Wonder why that is. Well, I'm looking at especially the way it ends with this very powerful pathos sentence here. And this paragraph is shorter, I think, because he's really wanting to make this point clear. His strong language here definitely lets you know how he feels about things. An impartial, objective writer, he definitely is not. Okay, so that's how you kind of do a think aloud. And I've gotten you through the first couple of pages roughly. So I want you to go through and highlight, annotate, ask questions in the margin. Just do what you need to do in order to understand this. And remember, you don't have to do it all in one sitting. If you come back to it here and there, maybe take some time to study a few paragraphs and then continue reading. That will help tremendously. Okay, good luck.